Т-90 «Прорыв» лучший танк в мире. Вот сейчас можно сказать, что Т-90 «Прорыв» лучший танк в мире.
Командиров в плен, остальных отход!
Why does Russia's most advanced tank reverse at only 4 kilometers per hour when an American Abrams can retreat at 40? How did a tank that was supposed to dominate modern battlefields end up losing 1/3 of its force in Ukraine within months? And why did the lead designer of the T-90 himself call the tank a mistake to build? You're going to hear all that and more in this video of the T-90. Russia's supposed technological marvel that turned out to be a 50-ton reminder that you can't polish a fundamentally flawed design, no matter how many upgrades you bolt onto it. When the Soviet Union faced the advanced Western tanks of the 1980s, the British Challenger, German Leopard 2, and American Abrams, they desperately needed an answer. These NATO tanks represented a complete revolution in armored warfare, built from the ground up with new design philosophies for modern combat. The Soviet response was the T-90, which sounds impressive until you realize what it actually was, a rebranded T-72 with upgrades. While Western nations redesigned their main battle tanks from scratch, the Soviets simply took their 1970s-era T-72 and tried to make it competitive through modifications. The T-90 shared the same fundamental design, physical dimensions, autoloader, engine, transmission, and most critically, the same basic flaws as the tank it was supposedly replacing. Even the name reveals the deception, T-90 Vladimir, apparently named after Vladimir Putin himself, though whether that's comically narcissistic or just a tongue-in-cheek reference to a national joke remains unclear. The T-90 was designed around Stalin's old philosophy that quantity is a quality all its own, a doctrine that might have worked in World War II, but was catastrophically outdated by the 1990s. In an age of precision, weapons, and computerized warfare, building cheap tanks in massive numbers was like preparing to fight jets with biplanes. Russia stuck with the T-72's architecture because it was simple and cheap to produce, but this cost-cutting locked them into design decisions made decades earlier. The early T-90 variants produced in the mid-1990s didn't even have thermal sights, and the most prolific variants produced today still lack commander thermals. By the time the T-90 entered service, Americans had moved on to depleted uranium armor and 1,500 horsepower engines, while Russia's T-90 struggled with just 840 horsepower. Even today, the T-90's engine tops out at under 1,300 horsepower compared to the Abrams' publicly stated 1,500 horsepower. At 48 tons, the T-90 weighs nearly 20 tons less than Western main battle tanks, and most of that missing weight should have been armor protection. The T-90's most deadly flaw is also its most basic, the ammunition carousel sitting directly beneath the crew. This Soviet-era design choice turns every T-90 into a potential bomb, with 22 rounds stored in an autoloader, exactly where any penetrating hit will find them. The autoloader itself creates additional dangers beyond just storing ammunition in the crew compartment. It's famous for eating crew members' arms during reloading operations, and unlike the autoloader on the T-80, it cannot unload or switch round types already in the breech. This means anything that doesn't fit in the 22-round carousel gets stacked on top of fuel and throughout the fighting compartment. When this ammunition cooks off, military speak for exploding, it doesn't just kill the crew, it launches the entire turret into the air like a 20-ton projectile. Videos from Ukraine show T-90 turrets flying dozens of meters after catastrophic ammunition detonations, a signature of this fundamentally flawed design. The T-90M attempted to address this by moving some spare ammunition to the rear turret with blowout panels, but the deadly carousel remains beneath the crew. The tank does feature a thin layer of aluminum around the carousel and additional Kevlar protection, but it's still just under the crew compartment, ready to detonate catastrophically if penetrated. Perhaps the most embarrassing flaw in the T-90 is its pathetic reverse speed of just 4 kilometers per hour, about the pace of a brisk walk. Compare this to NATO tanks that can reverse at 30 to 40 kilometers per hour, and you understand why T-90 crews call retreating a death sentence. When a T-90 needs to withdraw, crews face a horrible choice: reverse slowly while enemies shoot at them, or turn around completely, exposing the tank's weakest rear armor. Drone footage from Ukraine shows T-90M crews choosing the latter, abandoning any pretense of tactical withdrawal. Other countries have developed transmission upgrades that solve this problem, but Russia has never bothered to fix this potentially fatal flaw. The transmission system is so problematic it would make British tanks from World War II jealous. Even the T-80 series, which the T-90 was supposed to replace, doesn't suffer from this crippling limitation. The T-90's autoloader creates another crippling limitation. It can only handle 2-piece ammunition of specific dimensions, preventing the tank from firing modern long-rod penetrators that would actually threaten Western armor. This isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's a fundamental design constraint that dooms the tank to technological obsolescence. Russia has developed new, longer APF-SDS rounds, specifically designed to penetrate modern NATO armor. But here's the catch, only the T-14 Armata can fire them. The T-90's autoloader physically cannot accommodate these improved projectiles, meaning Russia's most numerous tank is stuck with ammunition technology from decades past. This limitation becomes more critical each year as armor technology advances. The T-90 also suffers from terrible gun elevation, managing only +14 to -6 degrees compared to the Abrams +20 to -9 degrees. This means an Abrams can compensate for distance better and achieve that critical first shot kill by simply raising its cannon higher to shoot further. In urban combat like Chechnya, Russian tanks couldn't elevate their guns high enough to engage fighters firing from rooftops and third-story windows. The T-90's armor protection looks impressive on paper, but reality tells a different story. The tank relies heavily on explosive reactive armor aero bricks to supplement its aging composite armor, but these panels have critical gaps that create vulnerable zones. The side skirts feature gaps between ERA plates that present risks to both APFSDS and HEAT threats. Many T-90s in Ukraine have been discovered with fake ERA bricks, empty containers providing no protection because commanders sold the actual explosive components for personal profit. Ukrainian forces have found T-90s where the armor consists of metal boxes filled with cardboard. The tank's active protection system, Stora-1, with its distinctive, glowing red eyes, was supposed to jam incoming missiles. This system includes 2 infrared jammers on the front of the turret and laser warning receivers that warn crews when painted by weapon guidance lasers. But modern anti-tank weapons like the Javelin simply ignore these countermeasures, while the Stora system actually reduces armor protection by taking up space that could be used for more ERA coverage. The tank's fundamental armor design is so outdated that it lacks any hard-kill active protection system, despite the Soviet Union being the first to adopt such systems on their T-55 tanks in the 1980s. The promised Arena MAPS for current Russian tanks remains in development limbo, with unknown production status. Russia entered Ukraine with approximately 70 T-90M tanks, their most advanced variant. Within months, they had lost 23 of them, representing a devastating 1/3 loss rate. The T-90s have been destroyed by weapons ranging from American Javelins to simple drone-dropped grenades, but Russia's clever marketing saved the T-90 from earlier humiliation. When the First Chechen War broke out, Russia deliberately kept their T-90s out of the fight, sending T-72s and T-80s instead. These older tanks were absolutely savaged by rebel forces, but Russia maintained that the T-90 was too advanced to waste on enemies without significant armored forces. The world bought this hype, keeping T-90 export sales strong. The Javelin's top attack profile specifically exploits the T-90's weakness. It flies high and strikes the tank's roof, the least protected area, then uses a tandem warhead to defeat the ERA and penetrate the hull. The missile's guidance system can even target patches of ground 3 vehicle lengths away to avoid detection by Stora, then redirect to the tank once airborne. Captured T-90s have been found equipped with French thermal sights rather than Russian ones, revealing that even Russia doesn't trust its own technology. With Western sanctions cutting off access to advanced electronics, new T-90s are being forced to use inferior Russian components. The T-90's mechanical problems are compounded by catastrophic failures in training and tactics. Russian conscripts received just 1 to 2 months of basic training, followed by 4 to 6 months of specialized armor training, barely enough time to learn basic operation. T-90M crews mostly train at their brigade level, and volunteer soldiers get more experience due to longer contracts than the mandatory 1-year service for conscripts. In Ukraine, T-90s have been used in ways that guarantee their destruction, unsupported by infantry, exposed in urban environments, and bunched together in vulnerable convoys. These tactical failures turn even capable equipment into sitting targets, as demonstrated when several capable Leopard 2 tanks were destroyed, likely due to similar poor employment. The command problems go all the way to the top, as demonstrated when Wagner forces marched on Moscow specifically to remove Defense Minister Shoigu for perceived incompetence. Colonel General Alexander Galkin's 1996 flip-flop perfectly captured the confusion. He first stated Russia would focus on the T-90 instead of the T-80, then months later reversed his position, publicly advocating that the T-80 was actually superior. While NATO tanks have modular designs allowing continuous upgrades, the T-90 is essentially a Frankensteinian mix of T-72 and T-80 components, with little room for meaningful improvement. The tank lacks basic systems that have been standard on Western tanks for decades: air conditioning, independent commander thermal sights until very recently, and digital displays that arrived 25 years after the Americans introduced them. An Indian order for T-90 went sideways when the Russians used older cast turrets mounted to new hulls, trying to exhaust their supply of pre-built components rather than providing proper protection. When India tested T-90s in desert conditions, the fire control systems and thermal sights completely failed in the heat. Tank drivers actually fainted from heat stroke because the tanks lacked proper climate control. Russian manufacturers offered to build special air conditioning units, which also failed catastrophically. India was forced to source solutions from the global market and remains deeply unsatisfied with the quality of Russian thermal sights. Russia also encountered problems in Syria when T-90s faced American TOW-2A missiles, with results that spoke for themselves about the tank's survivability against even older Western weapons. Modern warfare has been revolutionized by cheap, ubiquitous drones that can spot, track, and attack tanks with unprecedented precision. The T-90, designed for a world where detection required expensive manned aircraft or satellite imagery with time delays, is completely unprepared for this new reality. Today, hundreds of commercial drones can provide real-time reconnaissance for the cost of a single traditional surveillance flight. Once spotted, tanks can be engaged by everything from precision artillery to small drones dropping grenades through open hatches. The T-90's design offers no answer to these threats that didn't exist when its basic architecture was conceived. The tank's poor gun elevation compounds these problems. It cannot engage targets in buildings or elevated positions that modern urban warfare demands. This represents a fundamental shift in armored warfare that goes beyond any individual tank's capabilities, but the T-90's multiple design limitations make it particularly vulnerable to threats coming from any direction. The T-90's failure in Ukraine represents what happens when military procurement prioritizes marketing over engineering. Russia took a 1970s design, added some modern electronics, and tried to convince the world they had built a cutting-edge weapon system. The result combines the worst aspects of Soviet-era design philosophy with just enough modern components to create an expensive compromise that excels at nothing. It's too heavy and complex to be truly cheap, too outdated to be truly capable, and too fundamentally flawed to be truly safe for its crews. Russia's limited industrial capacity means they cannot afford to actually field new tanks like the T-14 Armata. Only about a dozen have been built over 7 to 8 years. Instead, they're forced to keep trying to make the T-90 relevant against modern threats, but the original design was already approaching obsolescence when first fielded. Even the T-90's own lead designer admitted the tank was a mistake to build. A damning assessment that proves even its creators knew they were trying to solve 21st century problems with 20th century solutions. As Ukraine receives late-model Leopard 2s and possibly American Abrams, the T-90 will quickly become endangered prey on a battlefield where it was never designed to survive. Thanks for watching, and if you're curious to see how the M1 Abrams is doing in Ukraine, I recommend you check that out next. Just click the video on the screen